We will now go to our last speaker for this session. That is Tony Rich.
I'd like to touch on more of the subject on asbestos inspections and materials that we can find there. And I'd like to also thank you, ADAO, for the opportunity to speak today about legacy asbestos. And hello, everyone on viewing online. For over a century and a half, the asbestos industry has produced millions of tons of asbestos materials, the vast majority of which is still present as legacy asbestos. As an asbestos inspector, I see firsthand the overwhelming amount of asbestos. Those materials are used in our nation's buildings and infrastructure, which impact countless people on a daily basis in our everyday places. I mean, think about it. For decades, we've practically surrounded ourselves with a known carcinogen that's claimed and continues to claim so many lives. In efforts to control the massive asbestos problems, government agencies have made regulations dealing with certain aspects around asbestos safety and health, such as inspections and removal protocols, training standards, communication of hazards, and others. But has this been enough truly to manage the constant risks associated with legacy asbestos? Well, knowing where asbestos is located is one of the most important of the first steps. As an asbestos inspector, nearly all building materials are suspect. I have yet to find a material type that has not had asbestos put in it, on it, or under it in some form. Asbestos may be found in many common building materials. I call them the usual suspects. Tom touched on that, Brent's touched on that. Generally, floors, ceilings, and walls. I walk in, I see materials here, ceiling tile. What's under this floor? What's in the wall? What's on the wall? Common materials. Flooring material, such as floor tile and sheet flooring, can become damaged from issues such as excess moisture, you get a flood in the basement, or just plain old wear and tear. Hire an experienced, accredited asbestos inspector first before any renovation or demolition. Use a licensed asbestos abatement contractor to properly remove ACM. Ceiling materials, such as suspended ceiling panels and ceiling tiles, even the glues used to adhere the tiles may contain asbestos. Again, have a proper asbestos inspection before renovation or demolition. In these photos, you see a suspended ceiling with panels, and above that you have asbestos-containing ceiling tile with asbestos-containing glue. The plaster that's adhered to contains asbestos. On the right, you see a close-up of the asbestos tile with bundles of amosite asbestos protruding. What's on or above the ceiling? In this case, there's asbestos-containing fireproofing. Is there debris delaminating from that? On the right, you see IT cables where IT personnel move the cables along, dragging that asbestos-containing materials with them. So the friable asbestos fireproofing, building maintenance personnel, IT staff, HVAC technicians, plumbers, mechanical contractors, electricians, fire protection contractors are all often affected by these materials. Also keep in mind that building owners are responsible for having an asbestos survey to communicate potential asbestos exposure hazards to building employees, subcontractors, and occupants. A proper asbestos inspection is necessary to fulfill this responsibility. Other ceiling materials that are suspect that I've found may include textured surfacing. Tom touched on these as well, such as troweled-on plasters, spray-applied acoustic materials, and other textures. On the far right, you see where they installed a suspended ceiling system like we have in this room, but they need to attach wires, and to do that, they went through the previous existing asbestos ceiling. In wall materials, gypsum, wallboard, and drywall, which Tom also touched on, as well as plaster and other textured coatings may contain asbestos. In the top left, the electricians cut through ACM drywall joint compound, creating exposure risks to themselves and other in the building. You can see where they push through the conduit and they cut through right through the joint compound. Vermiculite insulation in attics and also as masonry fill inside walls is a special concern due to its inherent friability. If this material is encountered, do not disturb. Minimal disturbance of this material can yield high exposure risks, as demonstrated in the bottom photo is a magnification of 400 times under a microscope, just nothing but fibers just from minimal 10-minute disturbance of zonalite. In other cases where electricians were installing can lights in a house and they cut holes, cores in the ceiling, out pours zonalite. Additionally, you find it in masonry walls as fill, and on the right side, that kind of proves the point where in this facility, the forklift was being parked and punctured into the wall, outpours zonalite. On the bottom, there's also, it's used as aggregate in plasters. Asbestos cement, Tom touched on this as well, is in the US known also as transite. This photo shows a section of pipe that was broken, and you see chrysotile and blue chrysotolite just replete throughout the material. It's typically a hard, dense material, but can deteriorate over time or become damaged, requiring properly trained personnel and handling protocol. You see photos here that demonstrate pipes being excavated, a large wall of cement sheet corrugated at an industrial facility, another pipe. You see fibers on the surface of weathered asbestos transite sheeting. The fibers are being liberated and eroded out in house cement siding that looks like bricks, but the fibers are also being eroded from that material. In this case, they could have painted it, but they liked the coloration of that tile, so encapsulating wasn't a factor for this homeowner, so they wanted to remove it. Above ceilings, again, fireproofing, very fibrous, friable material. The same types of trades can be impacted by this material. They're installing wire clamps to the material, and it was just all over the building. We have mechanical systems with ACM gaskets and valve packings that can also become damaged during typical renovation and maintenance activities. These are often overlooked during ACM surveys and renovations. They're usually concealed within pipe flanges and valves. But still, properly trained personnel and asbestos abatement contractors are often required to remove these friable materials. Here we have examples of the rope-like textile packing material. It's usually wound inside the valve, around the valve stem. These are the tools on the right that most shop maintenance folks use. They're flexible metal corkscrew hooks, and they just pick apart and tear apart the material. It's just a mess. Caulks, putties, window glazing compounds, sealants, adhesives, can become degraded and weathered over time, creating another potential source of asbestos exposure risk. Again, have a proper inspection before renovation or demolition that will find these materials, then you know what to do. Thermal system insulations. Photo on the right is in a school. It's on the floor. People just kind of stepped on it, and you have friable debris. Over time, these things can fall apart. Water leaks, materials on the floor, exposure hazards. It's inherently friable and susceptible to damage, which can easily result in higher exposure risks. They're often found on pipes, boilers, furnaces, HVAC ducts, and air handling equipment. Use as licensed asbestos contractors for repair or removal of ACM TSI, and I'd like to take a term from one of Brent's previous presentations on homeowners not to use their own work methods, and don't do it yourself. It takes all of us together with proper knowledge and safe practices to make a difference to protect ourselves from legacy asbestos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate your talk so very much.